1. Why is the use of IKO phraseology important? Why is the UKO phraseology important? The use of IKO phraseology is important because it ensures clear, concise, and standardized communication worldwide. It reduces ambiguity, prevents misunderstandings, and increases operational safety. In abnormal or emergency situations, standard phraseology becomes critical to avoid confusion, as it helps mitigate risks and reduces communication errors during radio telephony. 2. How do pilots learn to use standard phraseology in English? 2. How do pilots learn to use standard phraseology in English? Pilots learn to use standard phraseology through ground school, simulator training, and real flight operations. They practice standard calls, listen to ATC on the radio, and are corrected by instructors during training. Continuous communication, exposure to real operations, and repetition help them internalize proper phraseology. Manuals from flight schools, manufacturers, and radio communication guides also support their learning. 3. How did you become interested in aviation? 3. How did you become interested in aviation? I became interested in aviation when I was young. I was 18 when my dad took me to the airport and flew with me over Blumenau in a small airplane. I was very excited and happy at that moment, and I was amazed by the whole scenario. After that experience, I started looking for an air club and flight schools to begin my aviation career. 4. Have you ever considered changing careers? 4. Have you ever considered changing careers? No, I have never really thought about changing careers. When I started in 1992, I was very certain about my choice. Aviation has always given me a strong sense of purpose and satisfaction, and over the years, I have continued to improve my knowledge and experience. I built my life flying throughout Brazil in different types of aircraft, and I have never considered leaving this profession since the day I began. 5. When should a pilot perform a missed approach procedure? 5. When should a pilot perform a missed approach procedure? A missed approach procedure is required when the runway is not in sight at minimums. It is also necessary if the approach becomes unstable, if ATC instructs the pilot to go around, or if there is traffic or an aircraft still on the runway. Additionally, if the aircraft configuration is not fully set for landing, the pilot must initiate a missed approach. In all cases, the pilot should follow the published missed approach procedure exactly as depicted on the chart. 6. How does a pilot prepare for a go-around procedure? 6. How does a pilot prepare for a go-around procedure? A pilot prepares for a go-around by reviewing the procedure during the approach briefing. He mentally memorizes the pitch attitude, power application, and configuration changes and shares all relevant triggers and callouts with the other pilot. By anticipating the possibility of a go-around, the crew is ready to initiate the maneuver immediately and execute the published missed approach procedures safely and without hesitation. 7. What actions should a pilot take when there is fire on board? 7. What actions should a pilot take when there is fire on board? When there is fire on board, the pilot must first identify the source and immediately perform the memory items, followed by the emergency checklist. He will isolate the affected system by cutting off electricity, fuel, or bleed air, and discharge the appropriate fire extinguisher. After containing or confirming the situation, the pilot should initiate a diversion and land as soon as possible. 8. How dangerous is it when a pilot doesn't know his correct airspeed? 8. How dangerous is it when a pilot doesn't know his correct airspeed? Very dangerous because the aircraft may stall, overspeed, or exceed structural limits. For this reason, pilots must always verify the correct speed references during all phases of flight. Before takeoff, they check the performance manual, calculate the required speeds, set them in the FMS or on paper, and cross-check them with the other pilot. During descent and approach, they again confirm the correct speeds in the performance manual and ensure they are properly set and briefed. Maintaining accurate airspeed awareness is essential to avoid loss of control and stall. 9. What could cause a tail rotor failure? 9. What could cause a tail rotor failure? A tail rotor failure can be caused by several factors such as mechanical failure, a drive shaft that becomes stuck or breaks, foreign object damage, or even bird strikes. Any malfunction in the tail rotor system can seriously affect yaw control and make the helicopter difficult or impossible to control, especially at low speeds or in hover. 10. What might happen if a bird strikes a helicopter windshield right after takeoff? 10. What might happen if a bird strikes a helicopter windshield right after takeoff? If a bird strikes the windshield right after takeoff, the windshield may crack or even break, causing injuries to the pilot or co-pilot. The impact can distract or temporarily blind the crew, leading to a potential loss of control at a very low altitude. Because this situation can quickly become critical, the pilot should stabilize the helicopter, declare an emergency, and return for an immediate or precautionary landing if possible. 11. How do airports mitigate the risk of bird strikes? 11. How do airports mitigate the risk of bird strikes? Airports mitigate the risk of bird strikes through several wildlife management strategies. They use pyrotechnics, bird scaring devices, trained wildlife control teams, and sometimes drones to disperse birds from the airport vicinity. They also monitor bird activity and take preventive actions to keep birds away from critical areas, especially near runways. 12. What may happen if a bird hits the windshield of a helicopter after takeoff? 12. What may happen if a bird hits the windshield of a helicopter after takeoff? If a bird hits the windshield right after takeoff, it may injure the crew by breaking or cracking the glass. The impact can also damage instruments, sensors, or other components inside the cockpit. In addition, the sudden shock can momentarily distract or disorient the pilot, increasing the risk of losing control during a critical phase of flight. 13. What do airports do to avoid bird strikes? 13. What do airports do to avoid bird strikes? Airports avoid bird strikes by implementing wildlife control programs that include bird scaring devices, pyrotechnics, and regular wildlife risk assessments. They may also use trained birds of prey, drones, and even trained dogs to disperse flocks. In addition, airports manage the environment by controlling food sources, water areas, and other factors that attract birds to the airfield. 14. Bird strikes are a bigger problem today because there are more birds than 30 years ago. 14. Bird strikes are a bigger problem today because there are more birds than 30 years ago. How much do you agree? I partially agree. Yes, in some regions bird populations have increased compared to 30 years ago, which contributes to a higher risk in aviation. However, one of the biggest problems today is the presence of sanitary waste, garbage, and food sources near airports, which attracts large birds such as vultures or buzzard. These conditions increase the risk of bird strikes. So the issue is not only the number of birds, but also how airport vicinity are managed. 15. Why do pilots need to take medical exams? 15. Why do pilots need to take medical exams? Pilots need to take medical exams usually once a year to confirm physically and mentally conditions to fly. These exams conducted in a medical clinic. These exams mitigate and prevent incapacitation during flight. Regular medical evaluations ensure the pilot is healthy, stable, to performing all duties safely. After passing this battery of tests, can the pilot continue to exercise the privileges of his license? 16. What does a pilot's medical exam consist of? A pilot's medical exam consists of several evaluations that must be completed regularly, usually once a year. For pilots under 50, the exam typically includes vision and hearing tests, blood pressure measurement, general physical and psychological evaluations, and routine laboratory tests. For pilots over 50, additional assessments such as an ergometric test and more specific blood tests may be required. All these examinations ensure that both the pilot's physical and mental fitness are up to date so he can continue flying safely. 17. In your opinion, what will communications between pilots and ATC be like in 10 years? 17. In your opinion, what will communications between pilots and ATC be like in 10 years? In my opinion, communications between pilots and ATC will be different in 10 years. There will be less voice communication and more digital data link messages for clearances and instructions, similar to text messages. This transition will reduce ambiguity and misunderstandings, especially on international routes. Even so, voice communication will remain essential for time-critical situations and emergency events. 18. Do you think all ATC communications in Brazil should be in English? Why? 18. Do you think all ATC communications in Brazil should be in English? Why? I believe that in the future Brazil may using English as the standard for all ATC communications, especially as a commercial pilots. However, flying in small airports could face difficulties at first, since not everyone has the same level of English proficiency. In my opinion, if this transition happens, ANAC would need to require English evaluation and certification for commercial pilots. A gradual implementation with adequate training would be better. 19. What advice did your instructor give you before your first check ride? 19. What advice did your instructor give you before your first check ride? My first check ride was a long time ago, around 1992, but I still remember the advice clearly. My instructor told me to stay calm, follow the checklist, and brief each phase of the flight by myself. He also reminded me to communicate clearly with ATC and to focus on the basics: fly, navigate, and communicate. Following these 3 steps is essential to fly safely during any check ride. 20. What else may happen to a helicopter if it suffers a lightning strike? 20. What else may happen to a helicopter if it suffers a lightning strike? A lightning strike can damage the main rotor blades, antennas, and avionics. It may also cause temporary instrument failures or short circuits, and in some cases it can burn or delaminate the paint and composite surfaces. Depending on the equipment affected, some electronic displays may even turn blank. Additionally, the flash can momentarily blind or disorient the pilot, which is a serious concern during critical phases of flight. 21. How would you react if you had an engine failure after a lightning strike? 21. How would you react if you had an engine failure after a lightning strike? If I had an engine failure after a lightning strike, I would immediately enter auto-rotation and maintain rotor RPM within the green band. Then I would look for a suitable landing area, declare an emergency, and follow the memory items and emergency checklist. Therefore, I would focus on keeping full control of the helicopter and preparing for a smooth, controlled landing. 22. Is GPS a completely reliable means of navigation? 22. Is GPS a completely reliable means of navigation? Why? I'm not quite sure. For me, GPS is not completely reliable. The signal can be affected by interference, intentional degradation during military conflicts. Because of that, pilots must always verify the quality of the GPS signal by checking parameters such as EPU and RAM check and confirm that the system meets the required accuracy for the intended procedure. Before takeoff, before landing, and during the flight, pilots must cross-check GPS information with other navigation sources to ensure safe and accurate navigation. 23. In your opinion, how would today's air traffic management be without GPS navigation? 23. In your opinion, how would today's air traffic management be without GPS navigation? Without GPS, air traffic management would be less efficient. Pilots would need to flying on conventional navigation, which is a challenge in a large country like Brazil when ground-based navaids are not always available. Aircraft separation minima would increase, fuel consumption would be higher, and route options would be more limited. Overall, aviation in Brazil would be much less efficient without GPS. 24. What does a helicopter pilot need to do in order to execute a safe auto-rotation landing? 24. What does a helicopter pilot need to do in order to execute a safe auto-rotation landing? To execute a safe auto-rotation landing, the pilot must first maintain rotor RPM within the green band and control the airspeed. He should looking for a suitable landing area such as a helipad, runway, or any safe terrain and keep the approach stable. At the correct height, the pilot performs a flare to reduce the rate of descent and then applies smooth collective input to cushion the touchdown. Auto-rotation is a difficult maneuver and requires frequent training to be performed efficiently and safely. 25. How would you react if you had an engine failure after a lightning strike? 25. How would you react if you had an engine failure after a lightning strike? If I had an engine failure after a lightning strike, I would immediately enter auto-rotation and maintain rotor RPM within the green band. Then I would look for a suitable landing area, declare an emergency, and complete the memory items followed by the emergency checklist. Throughout the maneuver, I would focus on keeping full control of the helicopter and preparing for a smooth, controlled landing. 26. Has an increase in the use of simulators for training pilots made aviation safer? 26. Has an increase in the use of simulators for training pilots made aviation safer? How? Yes, absolutely. Simulators allow pilots to practice emergency situations and apply the correct procedures exactly as defined by the manufacturer and company policy. Training in the simulator improves pilots' skills, technical knowledge, and decision-making, while CRM helps enhance communication and coordination during abnormal situations. Pilots can train complex failures without any risk, which greatly mitigates problems that could occur in real flight. On a yearly basis, pilots around the world must complete simulator training, and this recurrent practice significantly increases overall aviation safety. 27. Has safety increased due to the use of simulators? 27. Has safety increased due to the use of simulators? Yes, definitely. Simulators provide realistic training that helps pilots apply the correct procedures exactly as described in the manufacturer's policy and the QRH. They allow pilots to practice emergency maneuvers and abnormal procedures safely, improving decision-making, handling skills, technical knowledge, and overall confidence. Recurrent simulator training required annually for pilots around the world plays a major role in increasing safety across the aviation industry. 28. Statement. Although simulators accurately replicate aircraft operations, it is less complicated to cope with emergencies in a simulator than in a real flight. I agree with the statement. 28. Statement. Although simulators accurately replicate aircraft operations, it is less complicated to cope with emergencies in a simulator than in a real flight. I agree with the statement. Simulators are extremely realistic and allow us to practice many abnormal and emergency procedures safely. However, a real emergency involves stress, pressure, and unexpected factors that simulators cannot fully reproduce. In a real aircraft, the consequences are serious, so the pilot's workload and emotional stress are much higher. For this reason, handling an actual in-flight emergency is always more complicated than coping with the same scenario in a simulator. 30. What can cause a fire in the cargo hold? 30. What can cause a fire in the cargo hold? A cargo hold fire may be triggered by several sources. First, an electrical short circuit from faulty wiring or equipment can ignite combustible materials. Lithium batteries are another major threat as they may overheat and enter a thermal runaway condition. Improperly declared or poorly packed dangerous goods can also react or leak, creating a fire hazard. Finally, certain chemical reactions involving incompatible substances may generate heat or flames. All these factors significantly increase the risk of fire during flight. 31. How can a pilot identify an airspeed indicator failure during the flight? 31. How can a pilot identify an airspeed indicator failure during the flight? A pilot may detect an airspeed indicator failure at several stages of flight. During the takeoff roll, an abnormal or unreadable airspeed, often confirmed by crew callouts, indicates a possible malfunction. In cruise, the pilot may notice inconsistent indications between the three airspeed sources or a discrepancy between indicated airspeed and ground speed from the GPS or FMS. Additionally, abnormal aircraft performance cues such as pitch, power, and attitude not matching the expected airspeed can signal a failure. Modern aircraft may also generate airspeed or pitot static system warnings, alerting the crew to unreliable indications. 32. How do helicopter pilots deal with tail rotor failures? 32. How do helicopter pilots deal with tail rotor failure? In the event of a tail rotor failure, the pilot must immediately lower the collective to reduce torque and maintain adequate forward airspeed to keep directional control through aerodynamic stability. The pilot should continue to fly the aircraft at the recommended speed until the flare maneuver is initiated for landing. During the approach, a run on landing is normally performed to maintain stability. At the same time, the pilot must apply the appropriate memory items and follow the emergency procedures specified in the aircraft's checklist. 33. Do you agree or disagree with the statement that bird strikes are a bigger problem today because environmental laws have increased the bird population? 33. Do you agree or disagree with the statement that bird strikes are a bigger problem today because environmental laws have increased the bird population? I partially agree with this statement. Environmental protection has increased in recent decades, and in some regions the bird population around airports has grown, which may raise the risk of bird strikes. However, airports have developed several effective mitigation strategies, such as using pyrotechnics, sound devices, trained dogs, drones, and bird scaring techniques to keep wildlife away from the runway environment. These measures help reduce the overall risk even with stronger environmental laws. 34. How does the flight simulator help a pilot train for emergencies? 34. How does the flight simulator help a pilot train for emergencies? Flight simulators allow pilots to practice a wide range of emergency scenarios in a safe and controlled environment. This training helps improve situational awareness, aircraft handling, technical knowledge, and decision-making skills. Simulators also strengthen CRM, since crews must communicate and coordinate effectively during abnormal situations. In addition, they enable pilots to practice applying the QRH and manufacturer's procedures precisely, which helps reduce errors and improves overall safety during real malfunctions. 35. Are there emergency situations that cannot be fully replicated in the simulators? 35. Are there emergency situations that cannot be fully replicated in the simulator? Which ones? Yes, several real-world emergencies cannot be reproduced with full realism in a simulator. Situations such as smoke or fire in the cabin, passenger panic, unruly or disruptive passengers, and medical emergencies cannot be replicated with the same psychological and environmental stress found in actual flight. External events like bird strikes or severe structural vibrations can be simulated only partially. Although the simulator can train the technical procedures, it cannot fully reproduce the human factors, emotions, or cabin dynamics of these scenarios. 36. What were the best pieces of advice that your flight instructor gave you? 36. What were the best pieces of advice that your flight instructor gave you? My instructor always emphasized the basic principle: aviate, navigate, communicate. He advised me to remain calm during any abnormal situation and to avoid rushing decisions. He also stressed the importance of following the QRH and the manufacturer's procedures step by step. These lessons helped me develop discipline, situational awareness, and good decision-making in all phases of flight. 37. What makes a great flight instructor in your opinion? 37. What makes a great flight instructor in your opinion? In my opinion, a great flight instructor must be humble, patient, and able to explain concepts clearly. He or she should have strong technical knowledge and provide honest, constructive feedback to help the student identify and correct mistakes. A great instructor also leads by example, demonstrating professional behavior, good CRM, and a positive learning attitude. These qualities create a safe and effective training environment. 38. How do you think Brazilian aviation is changing in the near future? 38. How do you think Brazilian aviation is changing in the near future? In the near future, Brazilian aviation is expected to expand significantly. We will likely see more regional airports, improved runway infrastructure, and enhanced navigation technology to support safer approaches and departures. Airport terminals should become more modern and efficient, with better passenger handling and safety procedures. In addition, Brazil is expected to improve its radar coverage and surveillance systems, increasing situational awareness and overall air traffic safety across the country. 39. What else do you think needs to be improved in Brazilian aviation in the future? 39. What else do you think needs to be improved in Brazilian aviation in the future? I believe Brazil still needs major improvements in airport infrastructure, especially at smaller regional airports. Increasing ATC staffing and investing in higher quality pilot training, flight schools, and simulators is essential. We also need new technologies to train crew members and ground staff more effectively. These investments will help raise the overall safety, efficiency, and reliability of Brazilian aviation in the coming years. 40. Under what circumstances can ATC instructions be disregarded by the pilots? 40. Under what circumstances can ATC instructions be disregarded by the pilot? A pilot may disregard ATC instructions whenever safety is at risk. For example, the pilot must deviate if the aircraft receives a TCAS resolution advisory, encounters wind shear, or needs to take immediate action to avoid terrain following a GPWS warning. The pilot may also deviate during severe icing, loss of cabin pressure, or any other situation requiring immediate corrective action. In such cases, safety has priority, and the pilot must inform ATC as soon as possible. 41. What should an air traffic controller do if a pilot is unable to comply with ATC instruction? 41. What should an air traffic controller do if a pilot is unable to comply with ATC instruction? If a pilot cannot comply with an instruction, the controller should immediately provide alternative clearance, such as a new heading, altitude, or speed. The controller must ensure proper separation from other traffic and maintain a safe flow, especially in congested terminal areas. ATC should also acknowledge the pilot's limitations, coordinate with other sectors if necessary, and issue instructions that the aircraft can safely follow. 42. In case of hydraulic failure, is it better to perform a rolling landing or a hover? 42. In case of hydraulic failure, is it better to perform a rolling landing or a hover? Why? In most situations, a rolling landing is safer when the helicopter loses hydraulic pressure. Without hydraulics, the cyclic and collective forces become extremely heavy, making precise control very difficult. A rolling landing reduces the pilot's workload because the aircraft maintains forward speed and stability, while a hover would require precise control inputs that may not be possible. However, the pilot must be careful during touchdown to avoid veering off the runway or losing lateral control. 43. What are the consequences of a hydraulic pressure drop? 43. What are the consequences of a hydraulic pressure drop? A hydraulic pressure drop makes the flight controls extremely heavy and difficult to move, requiring significant physical force on the cyclic and collective. The helicopter may respond more slowly and less precisely, increasing pilot workload. To maintain control, the pilot must reduce airspeed and prepare for a rolling landing, which provides greater stability than hovering. Overall, loss of hydraulic pressure greatly affects handling and demands immediate, careful action from the pilot. 44. How dangerous is it to fly a helicopter that is losing transmission oil? 44. How dangerous is it to fly a helicopter that is losing transmission oil? Why? Flying a helicopter with a transmission oil leak is extremely dangerous. Loss of oil can lead to overheating and eventual transmission failure, which may cause the main rotor stop suddenly. Without transmission lubrication, the drivetrain cannot operate safely and a catastrophic failure may occur within minutes. In this situation, the pilot must immediately enter an auto-rotation and land as soon as possible to prevent a complete loss of rotor drive. 45. What can be done to avoid having a transmission oil loss? 45. What can be done to avoid having a transmission oil loss? To prevent transmission oil loss, it is essential to follow the manufacturer's maintenance schedule precisely and ensure all inspections are carried out on time. During the pre-flight inspection, the pilot or mechanic should carefully check for leaks, proper oil levels, and any signs of abnormal wear. Using the correct aeronautical materials, lubricants, and approved parts is also critical. Consistent maintenance and thorough pre-flight checks are the best ways to avoid transmission oil leaks and ensure safe helicopter operation. 46. What safety rules should be observed during passenger boarding? 46. What safety rules should be observed during passenger boarding? During passenger boarding, several safety rules must be followed. Passengers should approach the helicopter only under crew supervision and remain within the marked safe areas, avoiding the tail rotor zone at all times, since the tail rotor is difficult to see and extremely dangerous. They must walk toward the front of the aircraft when boarding or disembarking, never toward the rear. Passengers should also keep their seat belts fastened, secure loose items, and comply with all instructions and emergency briefings provided by the pilot or flight crew. These procedures ensure a safe and controlled boarding process. 47. How can a flight simulator help pilots during real emergencies? 47. How can a flight simulator help pilots during real emergencies? Flight simulators allow pilots to practice a wide variety of malfunctions and emergency procedures in a safe and controlled environment. By training scenarios such as auto-rotation, tail rotor failure, tail strikes, ditching, and adverse weather, pilots develop the skills and confidence needed to respond effectively in real situations. Simulator training also strengthens decision-making, CRM situational awareness, and the ability to take quick and correct actions. As a result, pilots are better prepared to manage real-world emergencies. 48. What piece of advice did your flight instructor give you when you started flying? 48. What piece of advice did your flight instructor give you when you started flying? My instructor advised me to stay calm in every situation and to follow the manufacturer's procedures strictly, exactly as written in the manuals. He also reminded me to focus on the fundamental principle: aviate, navigate, communicate. This guidance helped me understand the importance of maintaining control, staying disciplined, and ensuring a safe return and landing. It was valuable advice that I have never forgotten. 49. How do you think Brazilian aviation regulation will be different in the near future? 49. How do you think Brazilian aviation regulation will be different in the near future? I believe Brazilian aviation regulations will become more aligned with international standards, especially those used by the FAA and other major authorities. Maintenance oversight and technical compliance will likely become more strict and structured, improving overall safety. Regulations should also place greater emphasis on crew fatigue management, ensuring proper rest and duty time limits. In addition, advances in technology, surveillance, and digital monitoring systems will influence how operators comply with regulatory requirements. 50. What advice did your instructor give you before your first check? 50. What advice did your instructor give you before your first check ride? Before my first check ride in 1995, my instructor advised me to stay calm and rely on the checklist if any abnormal situation occurred. He emphasized the importance of maintaining the basic priorities aviate, navigate, communicate to ensure a safe and stable flight. He also reminded me that clear communication and sound decision making are essential during any evaluation. That advice gave me confidence and helped me perform well during the check ride. 51. Why do pilots need to take medical exams? Ride. 51. Why do pilots need to take medical exams? Pilots must take regular medical exams to keep their license valid and to ensure they are physically and mentally fit to operate an aircraft safely. These exams include cardiovascular evaluations, vision and hearing tests, neurological and psychological assessments, as well as blood pressure and laboratory tests. The purpose is to detect any condition that could impair pilot performance and increase the risk of an in-flight medical event. Maintaining good health is essential to protect the safety of the crew, passengers, and aircraft. 52. What is your opinion about the future of communication between pilots and contraft? 52. What is your opinion about the future of communication between pilots and controllers? I believe communication will become increasingly digital with greater use of data link, satellite systems, and text-based messages to reduce radio congestion. Voice communication will remain essential but will likely be used mainly for time-critical or emergency situations. As technology evolves, digital systems will help standardize messages, reduce workload inside the cockpit, and minimize misunderstandings or ambiguity. Overall, these improvements should make communication safer and more efficient. 53. What was the most difficult situation you have ever had during a flight? 53. What was the most difficult situation you have ever had during a flight? One of the most difficult situations I experienced occurred during a night flight from Araksa to Joinville in 2003. I suddenly lost the electrical system which required me to divert immediately to Curitiba Airport. We continued under visual conditions at night, and thanks to good CRM with my colleague, we managed the situation effectively and landed safely. It was an extremely stressful moment in my career, but it reinforced the importance of teamwork, procedures, and calm decision-making. 54. What makes a briefing effective in your opinion? 54. What makes a briefing effective in your opinion? In my opinion, an effective briefing must be clear, objective, and focused on identifying and mitigating threats. I always share all relevant information with my colleagues before the flight, including weather conditions, aircraft performance considerations, operational limitations, and possible contingency plans. A good briefing ensures that everyone understands the risks, the roles, and the procedures. This preparation improves situational awareness and contributes to a safer and more coordinated operation. 55. Could you describe the airport you operate most often? 55. Could you describe the airport you operate most often? Yes, the airport I operate most often is Guarulhos International Airport. It has two long and wide runways, excellent taxiway infrastructure, and modern terminal facilities. The airport is surrounded by mountainous terrain, which requires attention during approaches and departures. But it also makes this scenery very beautiful, especially at night. It is a busy airport with aircraft arriving from many parts of the world. I enjoy operating there because it offers both a challenging environment and a very professional atmosphere. 56. When should pilots perform a missed approach procedure? 56. When should pilots perform a missed approach procedure? Pilots must perform a missed approach whenever the approach cannot be continued safely. This may happen if ATC instructs the aircraft to go around, if there is a system malfunction, or if the approach becomes unstabilized. A missed approach is also required when the crew cannot establish the runway in sight at the minimums depicted on the approach chart. In all these cases, executing the missed approach is mandatory, and the pilots must follow the published procedure exactly as charted. 57. How did you become interested in aviation? 57. How did you become interested in aviation? I became interested in aviation in 1992 when I flew with my father for the first time over the city of Blumenau. That experience made a strong impression on me, and I immediately felt fascinated by flying. After that, my father often took me to the airport, and I enjoyed every moment we spent around aircraft. Later, I began visiting flight schools and aero clubs to learn more about the profession. Those early experiences inspired me to pursue aviation as my career. 58. Statement: passengers injured during boarding may also be to blame. How much do you agree? 58. Statement: passengers injured during boarding may also be to blame. How much do you agree? I partially agree with this statement. The pilot and the operator are primarily responsible for providing clear safety instructions and ensuring that boarding procedures are properly supervised. However, if passengers ignore the briefing, enter prohibited areas, or fail to follow the crew's guidance, they may share responsibility for the incident. In my opinion, each situation must be evaluated individually, considering both the operator's safety measures and the passenger's behavior.